They bulldozed right through my land without a word, told me I'd get compensation and to just accept it. So I did something they never saw coming. I bought the very spring their entire water supply depended on and shut it off cold. What happened next? They scrambled like I held the keys to their entire world. It started with a rumble, deep, low, and unfamiliar. Not thunder, not tractors, bulldozers. At sunrise, I stepped out onto the porch in my boots and robe, coffee still in hand, and what I saw made my stomach drop. A construction crew I'd never seen before was tearing through the east pasture like they owned the place. Men in hard hats shouting, flags staked in the dirt, machinery chewing up the earth like it was nothing. My land, my family's land. I walked straight up to the foreman, heart pounding, and asked what the hell they thought they were doing. He barely looked at me, just pointed to a clipboard and said, "Pipeline install, HOA project, should be wrapped in a few weeks. HOA, from the new development 2 miles down the road." I hadn't gotten a call, a letter, not even a knock on the door. Nothing. I told him to stop. Right now. That this was private land. He shrugged and said they had permits, then muttered something about eminent domain, like it was some magic phrase that gave him the right to bulldoze my dignity along with my fields. I didn't know if they were bluffing, but the way they looked through me like I wasn't even there, that stung deeper than anything. They didn't ask, they didn't care. They just assumed I'd shut up and take it. That was their first mistake. You see, this land isn't just acres and fences. To me, it's memory, sweat, generations. My father broke his back putting up that old wooden fence line they knocked down without a second thought. My boys grew up fishing in the creek they just dammed up with muddy tire tracks and concrete. And now some HOA committee in khakis and Bluetooth headsets decided my ranch was the best shortcut for their water pipeline? I don't think so. But before I go on, and trust me, it gets a whole lot crazier, do me one favor. If you believe in standing up for yourself when someone crosses the line, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because this isn't just about a pipeline. It's about respect. About being seen. I tried calling the county office, and I was told everything was filed correctly. I asked for a copy of the permit. It had my parcel number, but not my name. That's when I realized they hadn't just gone around me, they'd erased me. The HOA had filed through a loophole, claimed an old utility easement that hadn't been used in decades. Technically legal, but definitely wrong. I paced my land for hours that night, boots crunching over broken grass, staring at their pipeline markers. And then something strange caught my eye. A water flow chart one of the crew had left behind in the dirt. I picked it up, brushed off the dust, and what I saw made my heart race. If what I was reading was right, then everything about their water supply depended on one single spot. And that spot, well, let's just say it wasn't theirs. Not yet, but it could be mine. What I did next would shock every man in that boardroom and make them regret ever stepping foot on my land. But that's a story for the next part. And trust me, you're gonna want to hear how this ends. I tried being civil. That's the part nobody ever seems to remember. I didn't start this fight with fists or fire. I started it with phone calls, letters, and patience. I called the HOA office, waited on hold for 40 minutes just to be told I needed to submit concerns in writing. So I did. Twice. The first letter laid it out plain. Their pipeline cut through the heart of my ranch, disturbed my livestock, tore up my fencing, and dammed the creek that fed my cattle. The second one even included an offer. I'd allow them to keep the pipeline if they rerouted it along the far edge of my property, away from the pasture, and offered a proper agreement. No threats, no demands, just a fair solution from a man trying to protect what's his. A week later, I was sitting in a folding chair in a community center gymnasium at their public meeting. That's where I met the HOA president. Slick hair, smooth voice, a man who talked like every sentence should end with a handshake and a signature. He smiled like we were old friends, nodded as I spoke, then leaned back and said, "It's already done. You'll get your compensation." Compensation. Like this was a business transaction. Like the land my father built from nothing, the land I bled into, could be priced out and crossed off in a ledger. That was the moment I felt it. Not anger, but insult. The kind that crawls under your skin and settles deep in your bones. They thought I was just some old rancher too tired to put up a fight, just a bump in the road. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that I've been underestimated my whole damn life. I went home that night, sat on my porch with the dogs, and watched the sun go down over what used to be a clean pasture, now crisscrossed with tire tracks and plastic pipe. I didn't sleep much, just sat there thinking, not about revenge, but about what was right. And that's when I started making calls of my own. Because while they saw an old man with muddy boots, they didn't know I'd spent 30 years in civil engineering. They didn't know I had contacts in zoning, land use, and, most importantly, water rights. The more I dug, the more I found cracks in their so-called permits. Technicalities they relied on that wouldn't hold up if I pushed hard enough. But here's where things took a turn. While scanning the survey maps and schematics they'd filed, I noticed something that nearly made me laugh out loud. Their entire pipeline, every drop of water they were routing through my land, originated from a small private spring about a mile upstream. A spring I knew well. A spring that, by chance or fate, sat on a neglected parcel that had just gone up for sale after the previous owner passed. I dropped everything, got on the phone with the county records office, and made damn sure the sale hadn't gone through yet. And what happened next? Well, let's just say it didn't just shift the balance, it flipped the entire board. But before I show you how one signature gave me more power than 1,000 bulldozers, do me a favor. If you believe land should be respected, if you believe dignity matters more than money, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because once I owned the source, the water stopped flowing, and what I did with that power, that's the part they never saw coming. See, what those HOA big shots didn't realize, what they never even bothered to ask, was that before I retired out here to this ranch, I spent 30 years in the water industry. Not just laying pipe or reading meters, but managing flow systems, negotiating water rights, and dealing with the kind of legal red tape that makes most folks throw up their hands and walk away. So when I saw that pipeline slicing through my pasture, I didn't just see damage, I saw dependency. And when I noticed that little spring they tapped into, the one just upstream, I knew I had a window of opportunity that only comes once in a lifetime. That spring sat on a neglected 10-acre lot, tucked behind some old fencing and a gravel road no one had driven down in years. I remember the previous owner, an old-timer named Bert, who used to fish trout up there until he got too sick to climb the hill. God rest his soul. When he passed, the land went quiet, and more importantly, up for sale. It was buried so deep in county listings that no one had claimed it yet. One call to the county clerk confirmed what I hoped. The parcel was still unclaimed, and yes, the water rights were intact and transferable. I didn't waste another second. I called the listing agent directly, skipped the back and forth, and offered full asking price in cash. The guy nearly dropped the phone. 36 hours later, I held the deed in my hand, not just to the land, but to every legal drop that fed that HOA's sparkling fountains, green lawns, and their precious, eco-friendly community center. The seller even threw in the old gate valve as a courtesy. Looked like it hadn't been turned in decades, but it still worked. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted. They had machines, lawyers, deadlines. But I had the source. And there's one thing every man in the water business knows. If you control the flow, you control everything. But before I tell you what happened the moment they realized who owned their water, do me a solid. If you believe in standing up for what's right, if you've ever been underestimated and came out stronger, hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure you turn on that bell so you don't miss the next part. Because the moment I walked up that hill, turned that rusty valve with my own 2 hands, and watched the stream slow to a trickle, that was just the beginning. What I found, buried under that spring in a locked box the agent forgot to mention, that's what changed everything. And not just for them, but for me too. 2 weeks after I sealed the deal on that spring, the moment of truth came. I woke up early one morning, grabbed my boots and that rusty old valve wrench the previous owner had tossed in, and walked up the hill to the source. The creek was running. Strong, just like always. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip, and slowly turned the valve. At first, nothing seemed different. Then the water started to slow, then trickle, then nearly stopped. That pipeline running through my land? Dry as a bone. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted respect, and maybe a little acknowledgement that this wasn't just some line on a map, but my life's work and legacy. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was the HOA president, voice shaking. "There's no water pressure," he said, almost breathless. "Our pumps are failing. People are complaining. We need this fixed, now." I told him I'd be happy to meet, this time on my terms. I wasn't backing down, but I was ready to talk. When he finally showed up, sweating and looking like he'd just stepped into a hornet's nest, I handed him a simple offer. Remove the pipeline, restore my land to how it was, and sit down to negotiate a fair deal, like decent neighbors should. He threatened to sue, said he had lawyers ready to bury me in paperwork. I smiled and pulled out the deed, the water rights in black and white, perfectly legal and binding. He went quiet. I told him I wasn't here to be spiteful. I just wanted what any man deserves, respect. 2 dry days passed, and the HOA president was bombarded by angry residents with no water for their lawns, pools, or sprinklers. Calls, complaints, even threats. After the 3rd day, he came back with a different tone. Tired, humbled, willing to talk. And that's when things started to shift. But before I get into the negotiations that changed everything, do me a favor. If you believe in standing your ground and protecting what's rightfully yours, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss what happens next. Because what happened after that meeting, it wasn't just about water or pipelines. It was about pride, justice, and a community learning a lesson they'd never forget. What they didn't expect was how far I was willing to go, and the secret I uncovered buried beneath their own development that would turn this whole fight on its head. They finally got the message. After days of empty lawns and angry neighbors, the HOA backed down. They didn't just stop the pipeline, they pulled it all out. Every last inch of that rusty metal and plastic tubing was ripped from my land and hauled away like a bad memory. They paid for the damage too. Fencing repaired, pasture reseeded, creek cleared. No more bulldozers trampling through my property without a single call or apology. This time, when they reached out, it wasn't with lawyers or threats. It was with a simple hand-signed thank you note. They thanked me for my patience and professionalism, as if those things could erase the months of stress and sleepless nights. But I accepted it, not because I wanted praise, but because I knew I had earned their respect. I let the water flow, again, but only under a brand new agreement that kept them and their pipelines off my ranch for good. It was a win, but not in the way most people think. It wasn't about revenge or rubbing it in. It was about standing firm when others thought you'd back down, about protecting your home and your dignity no matter what. Now, every time I turn on the tap and hear that rush of water, I smile. Not because I won, but because I reminded them that you don't steamroll over people and expect no pushback, especially not someone who knows exactly where the water comes from, and more importantly, how to turn it off. But here's the part most folks don't know. The story doesn't end when the pipeline comes out. There's something buried in the paperwork, something I only uncovered after the fact, that could change everything for my ranch and the HOA again. Before I get into that, if you're standing for respect, justice, and owning your power, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Because what I found hidden beneath their approved plans, that's a shocker even I wasn't ready for, and it might just change the way you think about land, ownership, and how far a man should go to protect what's his. Thanks for watching. If you believe in standing up for what's right and protecting what's yours, make sure to hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. I've got more coming that you won't want to miss. See you soon.